Hello everybody, I am Peppler. For those of you who are familiar with my channel, a lot of my videos are documentation work of past art pieces I had done. However, this marks a very special occasion. I will be doing my first ever audio commentary of the iconic anime, Akira. Today, July 16th, marks the 30th anniversary of the film, and I will be doing an audio commentary at the 0 hour as depicted in the film. Before I begin, I would like to give a shout out to some YouTube channels that have inspired me along the way. Oliver Harper, Movie Preview Critic, and Geekvolution. You three have given me the spark of wanting to do this commentary, and perhaps I may do more in the future if people enjoy this one. So right at the moment, we are currently at 2:13 p.m. Japan time, which is an additional treat because I will be syncing up the film for when the very start of Tokyo's destruction begins. For those of you who are listening in, this is only an audio track. That means I won't be playing the film on YouTube due to copyright restrictions. If you all can pause for a moment and go to the restroom, grab a drink or food, or get your DVD, Blu-ray, or streamed video already, then we can begin in the next 30 seconds from now. I'm a little bit nervous, but, well, that's kind of what it is from some of the commentators, I would think. So, I think that I'm pretty interested in how this is going to come out. But, so, I will begin right about now, since it'll take us only a couple of minutes to get to the opening credits. So, pause now. Everyone all ready? Alright, we will be playing right about now. You all should be able to see the Toho intro right now. Of course, I'll be watching the subbed version, which of course has the original Japanese audio with English translations. How I first got into Akira was an interesting experience. Back when I was a kid, I used to get into sci-fi, which at the time was originally called the Sci-Fi Channel, and every Saturday morning they would play an anime, or at least two OVAs of a particular anime series. So I had been introduced to Akira in this manner through that. From where it happened, it was a very interesting experience. At the time, it was introduced in the streamlined dub, which had kind of like cheesy, low-grade dubbing. Like, the voice actors, I mean, they didn't quite fit the characters well in terms of tone. And with that, even the translation was pretty wrong. Back in 2001, I got introduced to the anime again, only this time the Pioneer dub, which was vastly superior. And sometime later I wanted to read the manga, and when I did, I was very impressed with the quality of the artwork in it. And since then I wanted to get my hands on a physical copy, just because probably I enjoyed reading it, and there have been times where I just want to get back into reading again just for the sentimental value. And along the way I even found that there had been past adaptations, because the version I read was released by Dark Horse for Kodansha re-released it under its own name. And when I came into researching Akira, I found out that there was a subdivision of Marvel called Epic Comics that had the color version of Akira, and that was all translated and sent in individual volumes. So my main wish is that if it ever gets re-released again, I would definitely get a colored version of Akira in its original format, from like right to left as opposed to left to right. So, the creator of Akira, Katsuhiro Otomo, I had known some of his work for quite a while. Like, besides Akira, I've also been familiar with, like, Rojin Z and Memories, two of which have been connected with Satoshi Kon. Satoshi Kon had been a background animator for Rojin Z and even was a writer for one of the anthology pieces to Memories. One work I really want to read, or at least two, is called Domu, and another is called Legend of Mother Sarah, which I had been seeing in adverts in some of the Dark Horse comics. I think that was back when I was reading the Terminator Death Valley series, around that time. So, the backdrop, or background, of Akira. So, a lot of it comes down to influence and commentary, because the story kind of is a reflection of post-war rebellion. Because at the time, Ultimo was growing up in a post-World War II environment, and that around the time there was upheaval, especially with youth protests, including the United Red Army Group back in the 1960s. And that the creation of Akira was also based around an old comic series called Tetsujin Nichihachi Go, or better known as Iron Man number 28, or better known as Gigantor, back when it was released in the States as an old cartoon. I mean, even the character of Kaneda was influenced from the actual protagonist of Gigantor. The anime has been pretty much a success, a hit for ever since it was first released in theaters. Like, it had a budget of $8 million, and it managed to recuperate at least $40 million in the box office worldwide. So it's pretty much had been a very staple of what anime would have been if advanced in the right steps. the animation itself, it is extravagant. I mean, much of the anime, a lot of the characters are pretty much static, and they usually, when they're talking, there's just only one kind of mouth movement, being like open, close, up, down. But however, Akira was a different example. It used pre-scoring as the basis for the character voices. So with that, the animation was pretty fluid in terms of how the characters were talking and how they were actually performing actions as they're speaking. With that, pre-scoring it's a pretty difficult process, because you have to get all the lip movements down, and with that, you have to actually use a form of reference with the lip movements, including the vowels. And the same thing applies with stop motion. Even that is a very tricky process if you have to have a character that's talking. And I think that Akira also incorporated one of the earliest forms of computer animation for some of the effects, in some degree, because it was very minimal at the time, and I would think that when Ghost in the Shell was coming out in '95, it had already progressed very much, and that it would pretty much blend in magnificently with the 2D cell animation. Oh, and the cell animation, frames upon frames had to take up the entire progression of the film. It's been said like at least 160,000 cells were done for just the production alone. And another thing to note is the music in this movie. It is incredible. I used to have a CD of the soundtrack. It was composed by Shoji Yamashiro, and it was he was kind of it was said that he was a scientist, and he was also an experimental composer. So he created a group called the Geino Yamashiro Gumi, and that with this he helped get out at least a couple of albums performed by them, and his contribution to Akira was then added in. The sound quality on this remastered version is it's very crisp. But just when you're watching the original Japanese audio, you can actually hear the original sound effects that are incorporated in. And it's been a while since actually seeing the streamlined dub, but I think it also has the original sound effects. The Pioneer version has more updated sound effects, and with the help of THX, it makes the sound a lot more clearer, a lot more rich. And I think that it seems like the audio incorporates You know, it's been a while since actually seeing this, but I think in this version I'm hearing elements that were not present in the soundtrack. No, I think I got that mixed up. The audio, the background score, is having music that was presented on the soundtrack. But in this case, like in the past versions, you can only hear like only small portions of it. I think it had to have been like from remastering to incorporate a lot of the old soundtrack. Like with the extra instrumentation that's been layered in. I think this version I'm also watching is the 25th anniversary edition. Which was released around 2013. So, around the time that this was being made, Akira was still being published. It wasn't at the end of its run. So, the end is kind of a bit of a precursor of what the ending was going to be in the comics. And I would think that Ultimo went as far as he could in terms of the story, and a bit of like the very start of this, at least like the first act, is kind of like a prologue. Excuse me if I end up being silent on a lot of this commentary. And I usually try to process information and try to see what I can come up with on the top of my head. I mean, it's kind of a bit of a thing I'm trying to get used to, because I want to do this in one shot and not try to cut corners. So, another element is, so Akira had a lot of promotion over the course of being known in the West, including like there have been a couple of game adaptations, a couple which were like for the Amiga, which is kind of like an adventure game where you take turns as being Kaneda and Tetsuo. And there was the Nintendo version that was released, but it was more of almost like a visual novel type of game, and around that time there was never been a released version of a translated game. And there have been various chances at wanting to create a game, but there was never quite one that had been published out, and I think there was one that was cancelled before it was even get a chance of release. There was a version released on the PS2 called Akira Psycho Ball, and it's pretty much a 3D pinball game that has tabletops depicting various scenes of the anime, some of which include Neo Tokyo, the laboratory, the A room, and And I think the stadium also is added as the final table for the whole game. And there's also been talk of what would actually be in terms of like a future adaptation, because for a while there's only had been like just the anime alone, the feature film of Akira that's just been out. The manga had been republished on a number of occasions. But, so, there's also been talk of a live action version for many, many years. I mean, but I don't know if we'll be able to see that soon because of the backlash of Dragon Ball Evolution and Speed Racer. I mean, it's kind of like the thing with video game adaptations. They don't do so well as their source material. I mean, even the recent Ghost in the Shell, that, well, while it was visually very good, especially with a lot of the practical effects by the production company, Weta, I think it's called, yeah, Weta Digital, which did, like, some of the practical effects for, you know, Blomkamp's films like Elysium, District 9, and I think they were also involved in Chappie. But in terms of a live adaptation, my opinion is have the fans do it for the fans. And that would probably be the best course of action if you want to get an adaptation down. But there's also the alternative of what if a series was done. Ultimo was expressing interest in wanting to do a series based around his manga, which I think that was very recently, like around 2017, that he was expressing an idea of that caliber, which I think will be an interesting idea, because thousands and thousands of pages of a manga, you gotta tell at least the whole story. And why do a live why do a live adaptation, excuse me, why do a live adaptation of an anime without knowing the regular source material? So, I think there are some details that weren't properly covered in terms of, like, the characters. Just some trivia to share, like, some of the Capsule Gang. You obviously know of Kaneda, Yamagata, Kai, and Tetsuo, but there's also the other three that were also seen here. There was the tall one, and the one with the shaved head, and there was the smaller one that had like that was kind of laughing when he was in the interrogation with Kaneda. So I may get it wrong, but I'm supposing that Kuwata is the one with the shaved head and the glasses. Takayama was the one in the brown jacket laughing. And the other one is Watanabe, who was the tall, spiked-haired guy in the background. And over the course of the anime, you only hear the Colonel being addressed as Colonel and such, but you never actually hear his name. It was addressed as Shikishima. And I would think that they probably condensed a lot of this down, because given the publication being far from over, and a lot of the characters weren't probably introduced, it kind of seemed like Ultimo had to work with what we had in terms of what was already established in his work. So the animation style. As I said, just the way the characters are moving, it's all pretty fluid. It's almost as if you are actually watching a live action film. I mean, even with the actual dialogue, you actually see the lips moving. I mean, even in the Pioneer dub, they worked around this, and the redub was done flawlessly to where the English dialogue would almost sync up with the mouth movements of the Japanese dialogue. So, what would happen if Akira was to be put as a series? Ooh. What would happen? I would think that it would at least be an amalgamation of both the manga and the anime. That way both elements would actually have notable nods to their respected source materials. So, with but what if a live version was done? I would say if anything like that was done, it should be at least a 3-film trilogy with 3 hours done for each film. Because I mean, again, you have a lot of story to tell, and I mean, I would think either medium would work splendidly if done with the best intentions and done in the right hands. So, for when Tetsuo gets examined, this was further cause inspiration for a notable music video which was done by Kanye West. It was the video was from one of his singles, Stronger, which was pretty much derived from Daft Punk's Harder, Better, Faster, Stronger, which the video was good in terms of concept, but I didn't care much for the music. I mean, at least Kanye's variation. But the instrumental, it was more tolerable. When it comes to the science aspect, Ultimo really does kick it up when it comes to technical specs. I mean, one of the things about him being as an artist is that he is very technical when it comes to making his scenery, I mean, especially in the sci-fi aspect. I mean, such so with Neo Tokyo not being just dystopian, but it has the cyberpunk aspect of not only being a city of the future, but it almost seems like it's derived from the Blade Runner element of where there's this future city, and that technology is pretty much the basis of everything, and how it pretty much had been improved over a period of time. I think in terms of the philosophical aspect of Akira is that it ties in with many elements of course, rebelling in a deteriorating government state that is totalitarian, not fascist, but I think it's more authoritarian. So, and it often talks about the idea of evolution in terms of, given that the idea of powers such as telepathy and telekinesis, very powerful abilities that people would probably want to achieve. I mean, you think about it, the idea of wanting to lift objects with their mind or reading people's minds. I mean, some people would want to levitate or want super strength. Or be invisible, but I think probably the most dangerous powers anyone can actually think of are the kinds that involved ESP ability. As mentioned, telekinesis and telepathy. And that's another thing that's also not quite explained. Who were the children that were the subjects for the Akira project? Kyoko, Takashi, and Masaru. They are called espers, or ESPers, as it were, given that their psychic powers are kind of what the namesake comes from. Characters. how should I describe him? I would see that Kaneda would be pretty much your, he's kind of like the rough around the edges protagonist. Like, he's pretty much live wire in a dead-end city. I mean, always up for action, and at the same time, his attitude is kind of, sort of on the fence. Like, he's not much of a caring individual except for the friends he is closely associated with. For Tetsuo, I think despite him being as like the prime antagonist, he has a very sympathetic in terms of what he is as a character. Well, given that he's the youngest in the capsule gang, and that he even had been close friends with Kaneda for quite many years. And with him being angry of his inferiority complex and his dependency of Kaneda, it frustrates him, especially after when he got into the accident with Takashi. It kind of sets off the chain of events where Tetsuo is slowly starting to lose control, and with that, his sanity. I mean, because of such power he never had before, he felt he could want to take care of himself, and I think a lot of it he wants to express that he is capable of handling himself because of his past. Like, he doesn't want to be considered as a weak link or a runt. So, so Shikishima, or maybe I should. Oh, that's right. I forgot an important little bit of trivia. When I had the DVD of the Pioneer dub, I learned that Tetsuo had a grandfather that was put into the project, but it's kind of unclear of what actually happened. He luckily survived, and probably was a failed subject, and that it had to have skipped a generation before Tetsuo ended up having the ESP abilities that he had. So, Shikishima. With how he was portrayed in both the manga and the comic, and the manga and the anime. It kind of seems like to be the moral compass in terms of how the city is progressing, and even the well-being of the Espers, and the threat that Tetsuo presents. I mean, just the idea of being in charge of a military that is supposed to protect a city that is slowly decaying even after decades of reconstruction. It's got to be very hard on him, especially given that a family member was also associated with the original project. The more I continue watching this, I'm beginning to notice how loyal the animators were to keeping with the character designs that Ultimo had created for each cast piece. Excuse me. So the setting. I was not really clear at first if, when I first came across this, I wasn't sure if Neo Tokyo was built inside of the crater like Graviton City was in Project Echo. But I would think that in terms of geography, it was built outside the crater, and that much of the old city was also preserved. But I think that the crater was going to be built. No. I was thinking that the Olympic Stadium was going to be built inside the crater, sort of as a symbol of rebirth. Okay. I think so. In terms of her as a character, I would think that she herself is pretty complex, given that being in the resistance, she wants to do the right thing, given the state of how politics are going and how the secrets are floating relating to the Akira project. I would see her as sort of like a sister to Ryu, as Ryu is a brother to her, instead of like a possible love interest or sexual partner. And I think she would have, of course, triggered something in Kaneda of wanting a more mature relationship, because it kind of seems like he is portrayed as a bit of a player or an unfaithful boyfriend, given that in the anime he had a groupie girlfriend, and in the manga he had knocked up a girl that is an infirmary aide at his vocational school. So, I think that, connections, it's kind of hard to explain in terms of what connections there would be, because, after all, Akira was kind of like the magnum opus of Otomo. It had its own influence from a previously existing story, and he even launched the creator had made many famous stories through printed and animated media. Like, he had also been involved with the Freedom Project, as it was called. Involved, like, it's been years since actually seeing that, but it involved what I think it was like some kind of a race, and that the moon was colonized. And then there was Steam Boy, which was a steampunk film. Now, I don't know if he was directly responsible for writing, but his signature character design style was present in both of those. Steam Boy was more 2D, while Freedom was settled around 3D animation, simulating the 2D cell style. So, Kodansha, I'm not very well keen on like their entire catalog, but I also know that they were publishers for Ghost in the Shell, which is another good story I've been into for many, many years. I had seen the original 95 anime, its sequel Innocence, the standalone Complex series, and I even had read the manga. The original, it's two sequels, and unfortunately I've also had seen the live version. I mean, as mentioned, I enjoyed it visually, but in terms of execution and acting, I don't know. I just couldn't grasp it. I mean, I can understand it's being its own little adaptation. I mean, kind of like a future Los Angeles or San Francisco, but I don't know. And plus, I'm not really a big fan of Scarlett Johansson. While I see her good as a dramatic actress, in terms of being like an action heroine, she just has as much of a personality as a block of stone or a brick or a brick wall. I mean, I don't know, it's the idea alone of having yes, I'm all up for a strong woman, but she needs to have a good personality too. I mean, not just the ability to whoop butt whenever she can, because she could. But I would think like a perfect example of a feminist action heroine or any kind of film heroine would have to be, of course, Ellen Ripley from the Alien franchise. I mean, and if you want my opinion on Rey from the recent Star Wars trilogy, I just think they could have done so much better with her in terms of being as a character. I mean, like, I can never grasp on how she actually got those powers. I mean, was it all through influence of Kylo, or from Snoke, or what was it? I mean, from my experience, the whole idea of Force abilities was that you could be adept, but you also needed proper training, which takes intense control and focus. I mean, whether one is light, dark, or gray. So, Akira being one of the first anime to actually hit the West, well, there have been plenty others too that I could probably mention off. Like, there has been Tenchi Muyo, Vampire Hunter D, Dominion Tank Police, Wicked City, Demon City Shinjuku, Green Legend Ran, Venus Wars, and even another Ultima work, Robot Carnival. That is kind of a 80s callback to Disney's Fantasia. With the science in this is also pretty plausible in terms of how, like, the very aspect of accelerating evolution in terms of like, kind of boosting the element of, instead of Darwinism, you have the sciences to boost up human evolution at accelerated rates. And with how this could be done, it's also very risky, given the element of what would happen of what we become as evolved people if the evolution was done at an accelerated rate, and then we had these powers. How would we be able to control them? And what would be the choice we would have to use those powers? Because the very idea of ESP, it seems like it can be a very helpful tool or a dangerous weapon. I mean, precognition, clairvoyance. I mean, even the idea of precognitive imagery in dreams could be a sign of ESP, or perhaps clairvoyance if one is focused enough to take at least a moment to visualize perhaps an upcoming event or possibly an image if tested. I mean, even the idea of predicting movement at like a moment's notice could also be a sign of clairvoyance. And I would think that also empathy, I mean, like, intensified empathy could also be an element of being considered as a medium of ESP. So, unlocking ESP, I really don't know how that really could be possible if done at like a quickened pace, but I would think that if one contributes to a lifestyle of continuous practice and training, I'm pretty sure that there is the possibility of reaching that height of consciousness. And on that note, I don't think it would have to evolve on, like, you know, the dark religious practices, but more in terms of like more like spiritual awakening. Sort of like how the third eye aspect. I mean, I really don't know what others would think about that, like the awakening of the third eye, or the awakening the chakras. But somehow something of ESP could probably be done through means of probably maybe improved health, maybe possibly learning techniques that were probably used upon in past generations. Even something as meditation was done by Christian monks before it was out of practice. But, so, how the story is laid out, I'm pretty sure anybody can learn it if they take the time to perhaps experiment and see what results they can get from maybe a period of practice and education of the art. The political upheaval as seen could kind of almost reflect how society is as a whole, especially with civilization itself. I mean, even though we are, even in the modern age, we are still pretty savage. And with the very idea of us being consumed by arrogance, we don't probably accept that we are still flawed despite our advances as a people. So I think that the backdrop could probably also be a reflection of how we are, because with how we are, I mean, we are giving up freedom for security, and at the same time we are allowing a kind of a backdrop of uncertainty of where people really lie on, because everything is so gray in terms of how we are as people. We don't know what is truth. We don't know what is considered as lies, and we don't even accurately see what corruption we have that is laying within our own system. But so the world of Akira. One thing that should be also explored is the concept of the world that happened in World War III. It was briefly touched upon, like much of the Soviet Union in the Middle East was involved in the conflict, after which Tokyo was destroyed. It was declared as a nuclear blast, but it could have been possible. It may have been the case, and it may have been the way of having to destroy Akira, given the rise of his power. Or it could have been or it could have been, of course, his own power, but we never can really actually tell, because I mean, the different mediums, they tell different stories. So if Akira was told as an entire story, and it used both the manga and the anime as the main sources, and produced an amalgamation, and I'm sure they would probably give a background to how the war progressed, because we never quite actually saw what happened. And I think that's kind of an unused bit of storyboarding that was presented on the DVD I had. It briefly touched up on the backdrop of the war. My personal thoughts on Akira? Well, as mentioned, I see it as a masterpiece and a crown gem of anime. So, I would have thought that if Akira was given more time, and at least given the ability to have its manga counterpart finish publication, I'm pretty sure we've gotten at least a broader story. Because, I mean, for the manga, you could probably go through hours of just reading the story and catch up on the chaos that ensues from the progression of the plot. On an artistic level, it still is very good. The character designs mesh up with the manga counterpart. The visual aesthetic is impressive. I could say so many good things about this, and I could probably go on for probably, I don't know. What would happen? So there's just kind of a bit of a question that came to mind, like, what would I do if I went to create Akira? Well, and given that I myself am a fan, well, I would definitely keep it as close to both mediums as possible. And if I was to write up a story and perhaps pitch it to Ultimo, it would be probably at least a 3-film adaptation, each lasting at least 3 hours. It would be, of course, keeping with the source material, include a cast of Japanese actors. But then the big thing is, what would be the best way to incorporate dialogue? Because obviously the Japanese dialogue is very important, especially given it is, of course, based in that setting. Maybe using maybe bilingual actors would probably be useful, especially with wanting to get out an English version. Or use a combination of English and Japanese to kind of grasp the concept of like given the idea of Japanese being quite formal in most respects, and I would think using English would be kind of a defiance, almost like how Natsat was portrayed in Clockwork Orange to stand out from the traditional English language. The idea of genetics in Akira. I would see that as a possibility for the idea of evolution, given that, I mean, in years and generations and even, I mean, countless ages of I mean, even like how humanity has grown. I mean, even the very idea of even the animals themselves. The very idea of genetic information being passed on. And there's even the interesting concept of what if there was genetic memory still retained that we are not even clear of understanding. But then there's also the concept of what if the evolution goes wrong. It's a very interesting idea to consider on, like, what if we abuse our new abilities if they come, and what will be the consequences of abusing them. The idea of genetic material in space, it kind of falls into like the idea of genetic information passed down from outworldly elements, probably. Like, of course, the whole alien aspect, much as explained in Prometheus, another alien film. While it's in its merit, it has good concepts. I suppose if people dive into the concept of what could we become, I mean, there are possibilities and there are perils. Because, I mean, what would someone do if they were given the ability to have a sort of power that any of the Espers or Akira or Peppler had? Or what would be given to have that kind of ability? The military aspect, I could probably touch up on. So, I think that the Neo-Tokyo Defense Force is supposed to be based around the Japanese self-defense force, probably. But I would think that there would be a sanctioned division set in Neo-Tokyo. And that the soldiers themselves, they don't seem like sort of they don't seem like stormtroopers that are incompetent. I mean, they seem to be portrayed as very professional, and that, I mean, even the idea of watching them getting killed off because of Tetsuo's brutal power. It's very shocking. For me, it just churns my stomach, just the idea of a lot of those soldiers getting killed off, at least by by means of either a shock wave or getting pulled by debris. So, the how. What would happen, like, in like a couple more years, or a couple more decades even? And how would future generations see Akira? I would think that it would still be hailed as one of the crowning achievements of animation itself. The history around it is very rich because, well, the fandom is very strong, and just I even had created a Facebook page set around Akira, which is called Katsuro Otomo's Akira, the fan initiative. It settles around the whole combination of fans getting together and showing off their prized assets, and also with showing the news of various I've had that so it was originally supposed to be a news group for which I tried to share whatever rumors I had of the live version that's supposed to come. So it's been constantly changing out directors, and they're quite unsure of what kind of a writer would be able to take up the role, because even just trying to condense the story. And given the backlash of past anime adaptations, it is tricky to actually have something that is as loved as Akira done by Hollywood. But I would think that if it was done right, it could probably work out. If I could maybe, if it was done in if an adaptation was done, another good idea would have it set into 3D, because I mean, even the animation itself has a lot of depth to it and dimension. It's about as realistic as any kind of 2D animation can get, even coupled with the idea it incorporates a small level of CGI while keeping to the 2D aspect. How do I feel about the changes? Well, it's like I said, I think the changes work good in terms of the condensed storyline given, and plus the starting not finishing its publication. So what would happen if something like Akira was done up similar to the style of, like, as at the time it was created? Well, I would think it would take at least, like, I mean, everything has to be almost like done out of the panels and yet still be very cinematic. Because, I mean, even itself being as an anime, it still maintains the graphic novel cinematics it had. I mean, even if you take shot by shot of the whole story, you can actually still tell it all very much seems like a comic book. If I was to sympathize with one character, who would it be? It's very hard to really go for because Tetsuo is very murderous, and that Kaneda, just the idea of him as a person, there seems to be a lot of unforgiving traits about him, such as, of course, being a criminal biker, for one thing. I mean, I can understand it's all part of the whole system of being a ward to the state. I would think that Tetsuo seems more relatable, given that, I mean, at least to me, because I was pretty much bullied as well while growing up, and in many ways, I mean, there was always the struggle of wanting to prove myself, and it makes a lot of sense, but the one thing I didn't quite relate on is wanting to use my abilities as a person against other people. Because I felt that there was a level of responsibility that should be held, given that, I mean, just the very idea of being an outsider is understandable. I mean, even among your peers and friends, it's very hard to really quite stomach the idea of being so. It's very hard of wanting to be liked and respected, but people can't understand it because you're just quite different. Well, how did I feel about the English dubs? Well, again, I find the Pioneer dub a vast improvement in terms of the streamlined version. I mean, no, I may have gone wrong. It was like Steamline or Streamline, but I was surprised that the voice actor who did Leo in the 80s Ninja Turtles cartoon did Kaneda. But I think that in most instances the cast most anybody would be more familiar with is Johnny Young Bosk, who did Kaneda, Joshua Seth, who did Tetsuo. The former was, of course, best known for having done Power Rangers as Adam. And he was also Vash the Stampede and Trigun. That's another one I know of. And Joshua Seth, I've seen some of his works. Like I know he was in Wolf's Rain. He was Tai in Digimon. And of course, there's also Wendy Lee, who voices Kay. Before I get to Kay, I'm not sure if I mentioned this, but Joshua Seth was as Tetsuo, and onto Wendy Lee. I'm well versed in, of course, some of her works. Like she was TK in Digimon alongside with Joshua Seth, and she was also Faye Valentine in Cowboy Bebop, and she even voiced Rumi in Perfect Blue, another Satoshi Kon work. So I'm kind of So, for there was another thing that was supposedly predicted, like, given that the next Olympics are coming up in 2010, and that Tokyo is supposed to be hosting it, which is quite a surprise. And with this, I mean, just happening, like, it's supposed to happen a year after the events of Akira, the anime. With I don't think that the animation could have been done better, because I mean, it was a testament of its time, and it still is a landmark piece. I don't think anything really needs to be improved upon, given that, I mean, while it's not perfect, I mean, it still is amazingly done as a story itself. But it's just that the manga covered more. Well, I suppose I could probably touch up on popular culture that was associated, like, well, I remember that there was, like, an actual website that had a fan that tried to do a working model of Kaneda's cycle, using something of a custom frame and parts to build it. And then later on, there was a concept bike that was probably done as more of an inoperable prop. And in later years, there's even been concepts of motorcycles done up by different companies. I think there was one that was done in 2011 that almost had the look of his bike. That was done up by Honda. Oh, so besides that, there was even like the whole merch factor. Back when McFarlane Toys was coming out with an anime line of figures, one of them was, of course, Akira having a number of characters released, including Kaneda and Tetsuo. But then it later expanded to where they had a deluxe version of Kaneda with his cycle. Then there was the release of Akira himself, and even the Clown Gang leader, Joker. It was released. They were released alongside other characters like Tenchi and Ryoko from the Tenchi Muyo series, and then there was even Armitage from Armitage 3, and there was also I remember seeing another one. I'm very sure it was also associated in there. It's been years since actually having seen those. I remember having a regular Kaneda one, but well, even as realistic as figures go, I guess I should have had it as a collector's item, because I used to play with it. Of course, I ended up breaking the poor guy. I mean, there's even, oh yeah, even cosplay. There was like a book that featured which I think is called the Akira Club or the Akira Fan Club, and it featured like a photo of cosplayers grouped up as the Clown Gang. And there's even a lot of fan tributes done up for Akira, like trailers. There was one that I saw many years ago that features something of like forced perspective of where there's like the inclusion of the McFarlane version of Kaneda's cycle, and that it was in the foreground up close while the actor was put in the background to give like the idea of the bike being as large as it was up close. There's even been sort of like recreations of some famous scenes done up by using a combination of live acting and computer graphics. And that was pretty much what I meant upon fans for fans, or by fans for fans, which I think if an adaptation was done right, it should definitely be done up by people who had loved the series itself. Where do I see anime going as a whole? Well, that is a good question. I don't know how it is going, because I mean, I'm pretty sure there's still a lot of good anime out there that touch up on very serious subject matter. It's just a matter of figuring out what they are and exploring upon them. Because I think anime itself, it kind of goes more towards either larger than life situations or like overly processed fan service mixed in with slice of life. I mean, I don't know how it'd be if there was an anime done up based upon maybe a real situation. I mean, I think like something like, I don't know. I've something like, I mean, it'd be really hard to actually dive into a world that's as realistic as Japanese real life. So, what do I think of like any of the like secondary antagonists? Or, overall, I would say that Nezu was a very intolerable character overall. I mean, just the very idea of him being one that kind of set up the whole system of events. It's there's just something very interesting about him. I mean, it kind of seems like he just has his own agenda instead of doing the right thing. I mean, that kind of makes him a very unnerving secondary antagonist. So, I think another question that came to mind was, like, what would be the actual response would be if, given what if we all end up becoming more than what we are today? I think about, would our hubris destroy ourselves? Or would we be able to overcome it and become better people? Would something like what, is something like corruption be pretty much displayed as how it is today? Well, I would say that I'm pretty sure there's always going to be a level of corruption in any government. But there could be always, there can be change. It's just trying to find the right people to make that change happen. And have that change be a good one. Otherwise, we may repeat the same mistakes again. Spiritual aspect in this could probably be like how it ties in with like the very aspect of religion. It kind of falls back to the idea of seeing someone of power as a god. with that, it kind of follows through the idea of someone with psychic abilities ended up being as equal as a god, or as close to being a god. I'm kind of wondering what it'll be like today, given being the 30th anniversary. I'm pretty sure that a little earlier I saw that there was going to be some theaters in the area that were going to have Akira being presented. I'm pretty sure that around the world, people are going to be having their own theatrical re-releases of the anime. I wonder how that's going to turn out, because each country would have at least have their own taste of the film. And I pretty much think that the most recent dub would probably be put for at least the English version. It's hard to think that this has only been released 30 years ago, and it still holds the test of time in terms of its quality. It holds technical prowess. The cast works great with the characters. The music is incredible. Even just watching the original Japanese dialogue, it's hard to really express anything with just words, because it is just breathless just watching this, just after so long alone. What would I recommend? I suppose a recommendation for Akira would be pretty much any work that was done up by Ultimo, as mentioned. Rojin Z, Robot Carnival, Steam Boy, and Freedom. And along with that, and along with that, I would say anything done up by Satoshi Kon, including Perfect Blue, Millennium Actress, Tokyo Godfathers, and Paranoia Agent. My suggestion, if anybody intends to watch any of the classic anime, is to research it and try to see if there's anything that catches their interest. Like, in my instance, I've been more into mature anime, and that have kind of like realistic stories to them. But, I mean, there's also some action ones I also enjoyed. Like, of course, as I brought up Cowboy Bebop, that's always a good one, and I also enjoyed its music. But anybody should at least try to give a chance at watching any of the classic anime. All it takes is learning which ones there are and seeing which ones catch their interest. Well, if I have like at least one thing to probably prod at, is the Steam line dub. I think after watching it, it did have some very cheesy moments, and I mean, just even mispronouncing of names. Canada. I'm sorry, I just had to throw that in. What? So overall, this is nearing the end of the film, and I would think that it's been a very wonderful ride. But I think in terms of like how I did, I mean, overall I could have done maybe. I think with how like I would think that this is pretty much the end of the commentary. It didn't seem. Overall, so that is the end of the commentary. I think that hopefully it gives some kind of insight to how the film was done, a little bit of its background, and then and I intend to do more commentaries in the future. I'm open up to any requests if anybody has any to offer. I may plan on doing something in August very soon. It's another anniversary situation, but it's from an actual event, and I intend to do a film that is set around that event. Sort of have it as kind of there's a bit of factual trivia and commentary on how the movie was overall. I will hopefully get to where I can get I would say hopefully it'll be ready by the end of next month, probably before then, because I want to leave it as a surprise for next time. For all of you that have listened, thank you very much for hearing this audio commentary, and I appreciate any comments you would offer. And thank you all again, and I'll catch you on the flip side.